right. Happy Sunday, everybody. What's up, y'all? It's Dr. Paul. I'm here with the Comic Book Conservators. We are live for episode 27. I'm joined, as always, by Phantom Phil, coming at you from the Big Apple. And this week we have the Professor.
Hey, hi everyone.
Coming at us from Salem, Mass. And we're simulcasting on two channels, Flying L Comics, which is our buddy Captain Larry, who's not joining us tonight, and your channel, Experiments in Conservation, Professor.
Yes, I managed to figure it out finally. You know, I'm not good with computers, but it was seamless after all. It was my fault.
Nice.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Glad to have you here. Our viewers are probably used to you by now, Professor, but why don't you tell everybody where they can find you if they want to reach out?
So if you want to reach out to me, I'm on Facebook. You can reach out also on YouTube on Experiments in Conservation. And yeah, that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Phil?
Hey, so you can reach out to me Instagram at Phantom Restoration or phantomrestoration.com and send me an email.
Excellent. Hey. I'm glad to have the two of you with me. Captain Larry is literally in the air at the moment. He's piloting. He's doing that thing to pay the bills as we speak. Yes. So
I couldn't do what Captain Larry does, honestly. I mean, he's on the plane all the time. I couldn't do it. I can't stand planes personally, you know.
It would be a good lifestyle for me. Yeah. I mean, saying I couldn't do it is like, if that's how I had to feed my family, I would do it, but I would not enjoy it.
Right.
Well said. Yeah.
You have to like it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's do some shout outs. Hugo Danner, what's up, Mike? How are you doing? He says, thumbs up, people. Shelby's here, of course, from Shelby's Comics, one of our fellow members of the Facebook conservation community and a fellow YouTuber. Check out Shelby's Comics. Don Carter's here. Thank you, Don, for joining. As per usual, Maurice Devereaux is a regular, longtime viewer of the channel. We have, by the way, everybody, a link in the description to, just in case you're not checking out some of these other channels, I have a link in the description here to Flying L Comics, which was Captain Larry's channel. I have a link in the description to Experiments in Conservation, which of course is the Professor's channel. And actually on my YouTube start page, I have links to all of our allies. So you can find Experiments in Conservation there. You can find Shelby's Comics. You can find Captain Larry's Flying L Comics there. So check them out. If you're not, you should be. It's there's just not enough conservation content out there as far as I'm concerned. The more the better. Yep. Ben Stewart says hi, and Vulu says hi. Welcome, everyone. So we have a fun show tonight. It's going to move right along pretty quickly. I think actually we're going to do 3 segments, and we're going to open as we normally do with our fair market value segment and a huge book. One that I think everyone's going to be excited about. So let's get started without further ado here. This is our What Are Conserved Comic Books Worth? The reason we do this segment every week is because it's a lot of work. It's often a labor of love to perform these conservations. And sometimes you're not even making minimum wage. Those of us that do it as a hobby, you don't need to make money at it really. But sometimes you hope at least you're not losing money. And so because conservation is relatively new in terms of CGC designations, and because there aren't that many books in the census that have been conserved, we are finding the ones that trade under public auction or public sale, and we're bringing them to you with an analysis of what was paid for the book and I think this is it's fun and important. So where do you put this book, Phil? I know you're a big Batman fan. Where do you put this in the hierarchy of the Dark Knight's important keys?
I mean, it's the second one, you know, right after Tech 27, it's Batman 1, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It, for me, I think occupies that same spot, although, you know, some of those other early cover appearances, the pre-Robin Tech appearances, I think rival it.
31, I think 31 rivals it pretty well.
Yeah. And maybe even financially is closing the gap too. Of course, this is isn't this Robin's second appearance?
You know, I'll admit my ignorance. I'm not sure on that, but honestly, I think that
It's either second or third.
I think what transcends this to be the second most important Batman book is that the Joker is arguably the most famous villain of all time. So, I mean, this being his first appearance, it's uncontestable.
I was going to get to that, right? So I think one of the things that's Batman is known for is having arguably the best rogues gallery in all of comic books. And it starts here in earnest, right? Because you have the first appearance of the Joker and the first appearance of Catwoman in one book. Granted, neither of them are on the cover. Catwoman's not in costume. Nevertheless, this is the start of that rogues gallery as well. So I do think this is hands down the second most important Batman book. And I don't think that it's that controversial, right? No. There are, isn't there I didn't really delve into it here, but isn't there a variant here where the number and then .1 is a little different on some of the books? I happen to pull 3 or 4 books for today's segment, so maybe we can look at that. I didn't look at it before.
With or without the dot, I believe.
With or without dot is and is it known if one is a first printing and one is a later print, or is it just a mystery?
It is, and I'm not sure exactly, but as we can see here too, unless I'm mistaken, the no dot variant is actually the rarer of the two. But I might be mistaken.
Is that a mistake or on the part of the printer, or?
It was. I think it was. I think what it was. Again, I could be wrong, but I think they printed a small batch without the dot and then wanted the dot, so they halted the printers and then added the dot in, and then the rest of the run. So technically, no dot is first print, dot is second. But I would love to be. I mean, maybe someone in the audience would know the answer, or could make a quick Google and figure that out.
All right. Well, let's get started with that intro. So Batman #1, spring 1940. It's approximately like 12th appearance of Batman. It's either second or third appearance of Robin. Pretty early stuff. First Joker, as was mentioned, first Catwoman, a whole bunch of 0.5s. I think most of them are missing the back cover because it's a pinup. And that whole pile of, you know, basically, I think it's about 25 0.5s, pulls the median grade all the way down to 2.5. And it's really because so many kids pulled that pin up off the back.
Yeah.
It's
so true.
In terms of population, 147 universal. So this is in that sort of second tier in terms of golden age. You know, we talk about books under 50, key books under 50, key books under 100, key books between 100 and 200. This is obviously in that realm of between 100 and 200 squarely. I think, oddly enough, a lot of them are right around 150 universal. It's interesting. Yeah. So not the rarest of golden age keys, but an extremely important one, as we've already discussed, right? So what does one go for? Well, Universal. Here's an interesting book. This is a Universal 3.5 that sold in the last year. Unfortunately, this book must have already been cracked and the label sent in because it is not in this. It is no longer in the census.
Wow.
So I don't have grader's notes on it because it's been removed from the census.
Very quickly.
But I'll say this. I don't know if I've ever seen a 3.5 this nice.
That's why I was
Gorgeous.
I
cracked.
was really looking forward to seeing the grader's notes. I wanted to know why this is a 3.5 because this looks like a 7 or better the way it presents. I don't know what it is about this book that kept it at the 3.5 level, unless it's a really clean partial spine split.
Yeah.
I just don't see it here.
Yeah, you can see it. I'm almost certain it's a spine
Is that what we're
split. because
dealing with?
If, in my experience, if you're looking at the back cover and you run your eye along the whole edge of the spine, books that have splits, there'll be very small, almost imperceptible bulges. And from what I see one about a third of the way up.
Yeah.
And then towards the bottom too, it kind of it could be a split at the bottom too. That would be my best guess.
That's my best guess as well. But again, I was really looking forward to grader's notes. Unfortunately, they're not available. This has been removed from the census, or maybe there's a glitch in CGC's website.
Sure.
But I haven't really seen. That's very uncommon in my experience. So I think it's been removed already. Probably it might even be being conserved, right?
Oh,
We don't know.
Who knows?
Yeah,
If it's only spine split, it could go up way much, right?
a lot. It could go up a lot. This could easily
It could just
be
be
a 6.
someone hoping that bump to a 4 is worth it on a book like this to take the risk.
Yeah.
Keep it universal, but
Well,
maybe time will tell.
yeah, maybe we'll find out at some point. If anybody knows who has this book, who cracked this book, who's working on this book, we'd love to hear from you. But in absence of any additional info, all I have next is the hammer price.
Nice.
So $228,000, which includes a buyer's premium, of course, but does not include taxes. Now, here in Texas, we pay 8.25% in taxes, sales tax. So you're talking about another $32,000 on top of this. You're up over $250,000 after taxes on this book. In a 3.5. Now, granted, this one presents incredibly. When they say buy the book, not the grade, I think whoever bought this got a book, again, without the grader's notes, we can't say for sure, but probably got a book with a lot of potential, upside potential. So that just gives you a sense for what a 3.5 will get you here. Universal. Now, because this one looked so nice and we didn't have grader's notes, I went back to a sale that happened last year. This looks more like a typical 3.5. And in fact, this one still presents pretty darn well.
Sure
This
does.
is a different book. This is a book that hammered in, actually within months of the one I just showed you. It's a nice looking book as well. Like I said, it presents quite well, but it has some of the typical defects you would imagine with a
That big
3.5. It has off-white to white pages. Again, this one was graded in 2022. Silverfish damage, right top of back cover. I love that CGC can literally identify the species of bugs that was eating your comic book. These guys are experts. Stacking bend, full left of whole book. Seems like that could have been very easily corrected. Staple detached bottom of cover, wear spine breaks color, moderate creasing to cover, small spine split top of spine, wear all corners of cover. So this one still, like I said, it presents pretty well for a 3.5. 3.5 allows for quite a bit more missing material in the cover. Plus the material that was missing here was missing on the back, so it affects the eye appeal less. This particular book, I don't think you'll be shocked to find out actually even hammered for more.
Yeah.
This was in 2022, but it hammered for $264,000. Remember, 2022 was already
That's peak of the market too.
this was peak, I guess. It was starting by the end of 2022. The sell-off was starting, so this was probably the record set for this book.
Yeah.
I think this is still a reasonable price to pay for this book. Is that crazy?
No.
It really shows that, a couple years later, we're only off this by a few, tens of thousands. What's that when you're talking $250,000?
It's above the median grade too. So for all intents and purposes, good luck finding one above a 2.5. Really, it's going to be harder and harder. I bet this looks nicer than maybe some of the 5s.
There are no doubt there will be some 4.5s that present less good than this. No doubt. Yeah.
How many of these are on the census?
How many 3.5s?
How many 3.5s?
I think.
If you can't go back, that's okay.
It doesn't say here. Oh, I can. Somewhere fewer than 10, actually. Yeah. This looks like about 6 or 7.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, still fewer than 150 Universal is still not a cheap book, right? Now we come to our conserved book. So this 3.5 conserved looks more like a 3.5 to me, right? We have some color loss. We have a spine that is much loved. It looks like we have a partial spine split. We have some dust shadows. This does not appear to be an over-conserved book just based on all of those defects that you can still see. So let's check out the extensive grader notes. I think this is the longest list of grader notes I've ever seen. Interestingly, page quality is white. The label text reads, conservation includes leaf casting to interior, spine split, sealed to cover, cover reinforced, staples replaced, cover and centerfold married. Grader notes include crease right top of front cover, creases and finger bends back cover, married centerfold, married cover, subscription crease front cover, tape pull left top of back cover, tape stain entire spine. So what looks like a dust shadow is actually a tape stain.
Yep.
Leaf casting, centerfold conserved, multiple finger bends, right center of front cover, multiple tape pull, left center of front cover, multiple tape stain cover, spine reinforced, spine split sealed, spine conserved, staples replaced. That's a fair amount of work, but actually a lot of that is also just defects. At the end of the day, what was done here? Tape removal and then reinforcement of a spine split and
leaf casting.
The married, but only the centerfold, which accounts for almost none of the grade.
Oh, that is I wonder, I will say, just because it's maxed out, I wonder if there's additional information about, because I presume that there was leaf casting to the cover, but that could just be color loss.
I think it's color loss because that's where the tape was.
Cool. That does make sense.
Yeah. I was looking at it very closely because I wondered the same thing.
That's
I don't think there's any leaf casting on the cover.
Makes sense.
So the centerfold. So one of the things here that might be a red flag for some buyers is that it's a married cover, a married centerfold, replace staples.
Yep.
We've talked about these things before. Those are turnoffs for certain, some buyers. And when you're spending this kind of money, it doesn't take but 1 or 2 people to say, I'm out, I don't like that about it, to really affect the bidding on the book. Any guesses on what this hammered at? This 80%. One just closed week before last.
You want to go, Phil, first?
No, I was going to say you can go first.
You go first. Phil's going to go $1 under, maybe.
If it's 80% of the value, I would say anywhere between 180 and 200.
Okay, those are big numbers.
I'm gonna say based on how, like, the formula that we've normally used, I'm gonna go with like 75K.
75K. All right. Let's
Which
do some
feels
shout
low, but
outs.
just based on the other
let's
three
let
guys.
let's let it simmer a little bit. We'll do some shout outs, see if anybody else wants to guess here in the audience. Welcome, Michael Mayred. He says, welcome to 2024 peak autumn. Yes, it is the autumnal equinox, or it was, and everybody should celebrate that. 8% tax in Wisconsin, Mike says. Revolver Comics says 150K. Omega Collect says 125K. Pluck My Last Nerve says 90K.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm wanting to up mine now, but I'll stay
I don't know
back.
where all of you were when this hammered last week, because it sold for $50,400.
I'm way off.
Yeah.
The marriage,
Yeah.
sometimes I wanted to say 100 if it was just straight conserved, but the marriage I think sometimes halves the price, and it's not a rule, it's more of a guideline, and the buyers on this one would buy the guidelines.
Well, I also think this one, compared to the others we looked at, it presents more like a 3.5. I think those other two,
It does.
They punched above their weight class. Both of them did.
Yeah.
So I think this suffered a bit from super high-end books in conserved grade. I think it also suffered a bit from the marriage, not just one, but two wraps married. What do we think? Do we think
And
that's well
forget
bought?
the time, right? The
Yeah.
other ones were sold 2022, right?
The first one I showed you actually was sold in the last year.
Yep.
Last year, okay.
2023, so
Great.
full bear market.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but this is truly shocking to me, right? That's
Yeah.
substantially lower. Yeah.
Well, you should have been in there. You should have been in there with your bitters paddle, Professor.
I think that
That's
to the
why I
right
bid on
person,
Machi Comics for Doctor.
especially Heritage, I'll throw a plug at Heritage right now. Like if this was me 5 years from now, and I want a copy of this book at some point, I would absolutely say fine with the marriage, because it's a complete copy.
Yep.
I would just look past that. And for a plug at Heritage, I would just click bid and buy this book, and then I would say, cool, I'm just going to give them some art and some other books I have to pay for it, basically. And like Heritage is very accommodating with that in terms of giving quality consignments and having things paid. Because $50,000 for this, I have equity enough to buy. I'd buy this for 50, not right now, but
interestingly, the person who bought it has it offered now through Heritage site for 75. We often see people will double what they're asking, what they just paid for something. 75 is actually still pretty reasonable.
So do you know, this was clarified to me by someone else, unless you go in and turn it off, Heritage for accounts does that automatically. So you have to request to say, I don't want this thing to be able to have offers be made on it. That's not to say you have to accept anything, but they do it to kind of promote sales.
That's true,
and
but this one actually literally has a buy it now, Phil.
Oh, that's different.
Like a contractual, you could click on it and say, yep, I'm in. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm looking to make a quick buck then.
There you go. It's only a couple of additional pieces of art over the rationalization you just made.
It makes sense. Whoever bought this was a savvy buyer.
Yeah.
That's a great price. Yeah, I have to say.
So I have a fun bonus. Here's the discount on this book was a full 70%, right? I mislabeled the bottom. Sorry about that. But that's universal 3.5, conserve 3.5. Oh, and I got the tech. Is this?
Oh wow!
Hey, all of the text on here is wrong, but the numbers are correct.
Just the numbers.
I apologize.
Okay. It gets the point across.
I don't know that this one was entirely fair because those other two presented so beautifully. So I have a bonus round. It's called Would You Rather? Here is a 0.5. Now, this is kind of a special 0.5. This is the Harold Curtis Pedigree 0.5. There's an ad for Tech 40 on the last page, which would be coming out soon or says now on sale. That's why I think this is actually Robin's second cover, Batman one. But here's Harold Curtis's. For those that don't know, Harold Curtis is is a pedigree, about 500 books, I want to say. Every single one of them slabbed by CGC. The entire collection was brought to CGC and slabbed. If I'm not mistaken, they are they all number ones? Can somebody confirm that? I think they might all be number ones. Also, Harold signed them all in a stunningly beautiful cursive, which predates ballpoint pens. So it was some kind of a quill. Yeah. And as you guys know, I love pedigree books. Cool, I do think this one is neat, but it's also missing the back cover.
Harold put that pin up on his wall. How could he?
He put the pin up on his wall.
He enjoyed it. How sacrilege.
Right? So 0.5 off-white pages, universal, Harold Curtis pedigree. Back cover missing, front cover detached, incomplete, small amount of tape on interior. Grader notes, detached front cover, light staining to cover, missing back cover, moderate creasing to cover, moderate tear cover, small tape pages 32, spine roll. And this one also, oddly enough, presents really well until you turn it over.
Yeah.
Right? Anybody want to guess what this hammered at?
Phil, you go first.
All right, this time I'll go. I'm gonna take a guess and say 65.
Okay. That's a good guess. Anyone else?
I'm terrible with guessing. I'm going to say about 50.
50. Omega Collects says 38K.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It sold just a little over a year ago for $72,000. And by the way, this one changed hands about 2 or 3 years before that for, I think, $56,000. Yeah. So this particular copy, we told you there's a whole pile of 0.5s. This might be the most desirable of the 0.5s.
Yeah.
For what it's worth. So, would you rather? We could do it head to head, or we could literally do the 3.5 plus 20 grand versus the 0.5 Harold Curtis pedigree. What do you guys think?
Professor, what do you think? Which one would you rather have?
I'm not gonna have either one of them. I think. Financial status.
But this is would you rather?
I would say which one would I rather have? I mean, if it's a pedigree, I'm not gonna be well. Would you conserve a pedigree? Sure. I guess you can.
It would be your book to do with what you wanted. Yeah.
Your book, you can conserve it, but how?
The provenance would still be there to answer.
After you conserve it, how would you? Yeah, how would you verify it is?
They would.
Oh, it's signed here. There's ink on the cover. Yeah, Harold Curtis has signed the cover.
Signed, yeah.
It would be a conserved pedigree, is what it would be, if you were to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I like the back cover, right? I do like the back cover on the conserved 3.5 having that, right? Mm-hmm. But there is a potential for the number one, the 0.5, to go up a little bit, although it is expensive, but it's a pedigree.
Yeah.
So it's like 50-50. I would go slightly with the pedigree.
Oh, okay, fun.
Paul, what about you, Dr. Paul?
I thought about this when I was putting the deck together.
Just seeing your eyes go back and forth a little bit.
I think the upside on Harold Curtis's copy is about the same as the 3.5 conserved. I think like conserving this book, you're going to potentially bring it up to about a 4, and it's going to be married. It's going to be a married 4 is like your best potential outcome, but then you'll have a pedigree married 4. Part of me wonders if we should repair pedigree books, right? Harold Curtis, part of the provenance here is that Harold took the back cover off and hung it up. So I think I wouldn't want to conserve it. Let me correct that. I wouldn't want to marry it. I think conserving it in terms of deacidification, correcting other flaws, I'm fine with. I'm not sure that that's one of those things where you're actually kind of messing with the provenance to marry a back cover on it, in my opinion. So I think I would rather have I'll take the 3.5 plus the cash in this instance.
Okay. Can I say, so literally the one thing for me that is the deciding factor, I can't help it because like my dad is so stringent on like color fade and stuff like that I can't help you.
I didn't mention it, but I thought about it too.
The reds for me somehow, like normally I would be against a book with a centerfold and a cover married, but in this case, if I have to look at this book all the time, no offense to Harold Curtis, but man, he left that thing out in the sun a little bit, and the one on the left, those reds call to me in a way where I'm like,
look how intense they are.
The marriage is okay. Yeah,
even the greens. Look how intense the greens are.
Even from the right side where the tape was actually holding in the color and it wasn't as faded as in the center, that center red is still brighter than the red on the Curtis. So I'm like, I like the reds. The reds.
I thought about it too.
But I also can understand the argument, Professor, for wanting the pedigree copy too. I'm 50-50 too. I'm just on the other side of the fence. But I think
that's why, Would You Rather is fun. If you find two that are really evenly matched, it's a fun game.
You're right. The greens too and the 10 sun icon are so much more bright.
And on Robin's costume.
Crazy.
Yeah. Look at the greens on Robin's costume, how much more alive they are.
My eye always goes straight to that.
Look at Robin's legs. Ooh, look at Robin's legs. But really, look at Robin's legs. Even the flesh looks more alive.
That pointed arrow almost right beneath Batman, to me, my eye always goes there when I see the book first. And it wasn't intentional when they drew that building, but it's an arrow. And I just, like, my eye always sees that first. So on the right, I just see orange. On the left, I see red. And that's what my eye sees.
Yeah. Shelby says he'd have to go with the pedigree because can't stand the tape pulls on the 3.5 conserved, and I don't blame him.
Yeah, I get that.
It does not have the same eye appeal. But then again, like we talked, the color's more intense. So different people like different things.
Exactly. We're all around. Everyone collects differently. Yeah. I love that.
So that was the game. What do y'all think?
Very nice.
Well bought, huh?
Yeah.
I think what that shows is, from two different ways to think about the book, it was well bought. It compares very favorably to the Harold Curtis book, and it also compares favorably to Universal 3.5s in terms of the discount. So I think it was well bought. And congratulations!
Such a cool book.
I doff my hat to the winning bidder.
Yes.
All right. Well. Before we get into our next segment, let's do a quick PSA. Let's talk about the Comic Book Community Awards and the finalist list, which includes this channel. Thank you, everybody. I'm humbled and really happy to have been nominated and to become a finalist. Comic Cap Collectibles, Immaculate Comics, our friend Rick Morgan, Jerry the Jitterbug, of course, who is supposed to be making an appearance on this show soon. We're working out scheduling, so looking forward to that. And Spine Ticks Pressing. In keeping with our collaborative attitude, I am not going to ask you to vote for this channel because it is sort of a zero-sum game, and I don't really love zero-sum games. I like when we all win together. I will ask you to vote for somebody. So I've put a link in the description of this video, made it super easy for you. Scroll down to that link, click on the link, go to the ballot, cast a vote for one of these. It's a long ballot. If you don't want to vote for any other channels or any other content groups, this happens to be the 22nd one down. So you can count them as you scroll and vote for somebody here. Everybody here is doing it and losing money doing it, because they are doing it for the love of the hobby, because it just costs money to have, even if you're monetized, it just costs money to have a channel in this space. And so I appreciate all of these content creators, and I hope you show them some appreciation too. So that's the end of the PSA, and we're going to go into a segment on the professor's work. Experiments in conservation over on his channel.
Archie is what I can afford, Doctor.
Well,
that's about the extent of it these days. I save my money for Christmas time, and I buy a nice book then usually.
Yeah.
Once or twice a year, I treat myself.
Archie's fun, and Archie's iconic, and we talked about Archie's first appearance being a really big book. A bit underrated because he's not on the cover, but I love Archie. Archie's got a big following. By the way, we watched that whole Riverdale series all the way through, my wife and I. We really enjoyed it.
Yeah. This is Archie at Riverdale High, of course,
Yeah. So the professor's had a series of really phenomenal videos. He and I have been scouring the literature for input into best practices for leaf casting. And most of that literature is by paper conservationists, library curators of museums, librarian, and paper scientists. And it is mostly focused on old, very valuable documents that justify, very rare documents that justify their time, right?
Yes.
Very little, if any of it, is performed on newsprint, because newsprint is generally not making the cut for the documents we're talking about. We're talking about handmade books on handmade paper and signed documents and pieces of art from centuries ago. Nevertheless, there's a lot to learn from that literature, and I think it's fair to say he and I have been collaborating as we study this literature and put together what we think are the best practices. And so he had a series of videos recently that I was fascinated by and loved to see the outcomes from, and that's why I invited him on to share some of those experiments and outcomes with us. So welcome. And take it away. Just let me know when you want next slide.
Okay. So this Archie had some rodent shoes, probably, right? Would you say, or silverfish? That's
well, I'm not CGC, so I can't ID the species.
You can't really tell, yeah. So the cover, this was coverless copy, of course, I got, and the cover is a picture from eBay. I don't have the actual book, the full book here with me, but you can see that the wrap was badly chewed, and then I experimented with the entire wrap, essentially almost every single wrap. I worked on using different techniques.
So what's great about this is it's almost like twins in genetic experiments, right? You have every wrap has a left and a right side with these defects. And you can do
different techniques. And
do one thing on one side and one on the other, and you have a perfect control right there. So
it was a coverless copy too, so a perfect cheap candidate to do this on without worrying about anything happening.
I did make sure no comic books were mutilated in the making of these video series before I invited the professor on, just so everybody knows. People for the ethical treatment of comics, just back off. Everything's okay.
Yeah. And the color match isn't there, as you can see on the right picture, but when I measure the thickness of the pulp added, it matches actually with the thickness of the wrap itself. It's 0.12. I measured it today, actually. I got this today, nick of time.
Oh yeah.
And caliper, and I was able to measure the thickness of the wrap was 0.12, as I had predicted, right? Measuring a whole lot of them. And then I measured the thickness of the fill itself after I had done it. One was 0.12, one was 0.13.
Wow.
So right on the money as far as the math
goes.
It doesn't look as good, right? If you fill it more, it'll look better perhaps. But you run your fingers on it. There are no bumps. Everything's nice and smooth.
Oh, that's
It looks
awesome.
like natural. It looks like part of that.
Yeah.
See if I can show it here.
So the goal here, and why you weren't even bothering, I mean, we often do this in science. We just try to isolate one variable at a time. You were not concerned with color match here. You
No.
were specifically working on a few things to get the thickness of the newly cast paper to match as closely as possible the original paper.
Exactly. So the math part, works. The practical aspect of it sometimes is a bit off, or can look deceptively way off. When we do the infills, you say, I didn't add enough. And then, as I said afterwards, the infills actually were the same thickness as the wrap. So that goes to show you that we're not good judges sometimes of the actual work we're doing.
Right. And so one of the reasons this is important is because if, like in this particular example, you have a book where you need to leaf cast literally every leaf all the way through, by some methods, and we've had guests, we've had Larry and others make the comment that it's just thicker. It just is, like, it can't be escaped. That's just a fact. Well, then all those extra thicknesses add up. And in fact, they can add up to the point where they actually cause problems, where, as Larry's commented, you can no longer use the original staple. The arms aren't long enough if you've had to recast the entire the centerfold on the center crease on every wrap all the way through a book. So this is very important work, and we're going to get into it.
Yes. So next slide, please.
Yes, sir.
So I'm presenting several methods here. One of them I used here is called couching the infills, or I'm calling it couching the infills. It relies on using a mold and a decal, where you end up, and this is something we need to discuss at some point, is adding the precise amount of the pulp into the mold, right? So that you get a thickness of 0.12 mils.
So Professor, if I may, just for those that aren't familiar with what we're talking about here. So this is how handmade paper is made. So this is how paper was made for a couple thousand years.
Yeah,
right up until the 1850s-ish. Actually, even beyond that. Machine paper didn't come into play until a little bit later than that. So from the invention of paper around the time of Christ all the way up to about 100 years ago, this is how paper was made. The bottom piece with the screen is called the mold.
Yeah.
And then you have a piece of wood, which is just kind of a dam that goes around the mold, and that's called the decal.
Yes.
And the way that handmade paper is made, there's a vat with pulp suspended in water, and the person making the paper is called the vat man. The vat man takes this decal, puts it in the vat, lifts it up, and shakes it to settle the water through, and the resulting layer of pulp on the screen of the mold is then placed on a felt traditionally.
It's couched on a felt.
And that process is called couched. Sometimes it's done. It's usually done when it's in mass production. There's a felt. You couch a piece of paper,
you tie them up and you press them at the end.
And then you take all of that and you press it. And then, of course, once it's pressed, you take it out and dry it, and then you have paper. It can have, and then all bunch of other things can be done to the paper with sizing and additives and all kind of other things. But this is handmade paper. So the reason why this is important is because fundamentally, this is exactly what we're doing when we're leaf casting. We are laying handmade paper. What are our raw materials? Our raw materials are pulp. So this is just like anytime you want to, like if you want to learn how to drive a race car, first you should learn how to drive a sedan on the streets, right? Or maybe a go-kart. But point being, you have to learn the fundamentals. So if you want to be good at leaf casting, from my perspective, I don't think you want to just start with leaf casting. You want to start with paper making. That's how you learn all the fundamentals. Paper making is well understood. As I said, it's been practiced for millennia.
Mm-hmm.
There's a robust hobby of handmade paper. There's tens of thousands of people, probably just in the United States, probably hundreds of thousands around the world, who make handmade paper as a hobby. And so there's a lot of information out there. And so just as background, sorry for the interruption, Professor, but for those that aren't familiar,
the Kuching idea and the mold idea, of course, came to me just in my dream, right? I was like, I should try this, right? I mean, video after video I watched on paper making and using the mold and decal. And then eventually I was reading this paper by Keiko Keys, right? That she used the same method I was using. And this is in the late 1970s, right?
Yeah.
So separated by 40 years,
76.
Right? Here we are, using, essentially thinking of the same thing. So what you end up doing essentially is taking the mold and decal and you put it in the vat, like Dr. Paul said. And you pull up the pulp and then you use a sponge to dry to get rid of all the liquid in the back, right? And then you couch it on top of a felt or a piece of cloth that you wet. And you end up with a sheet of paper that is really, looks like the one, let's see, I wish I numbered these, but the top middle one.
Top center.
Center, right? And then you could roll it, right? And what I do is I end up rolling it once. And I get the top right. You can see how thin the sheet is. Right? What you could do then is you can go to the next slide, Dr. Paul, is cut out a piece, as you can see in the top left, cut out a piece with a razor blade or with just a spatula that matches with the width and length of the spot you want to fill. And just take it with your finger or with the utility knife that you have and stick it there on top.
Like
you can work on the edges and slim the edges out, and you'd have a consistent sheet going on the top. You didn't pipette anything, you just made the transfer. Of course, the problem is, what I found out is after pressing and everything, is that the hydrogen bonding with the wrap isn't very strong. So the solution to that was to were two solutions. One, to brush the area around the spot with wheat paste, and then lay the piece on. Or what you could do, or you could do both, is spray the wrap heavily with water, lay the pieces on, spray them again with water, let them sit. This way you can hydrate the cellulose fibers and create more hydrogen bonding, more interconnection. The cellulose, you have these, you have the covalent bonds, you have the glycosidic linkages between the glucoses, right, that are very strong, and then you have these chains of cellulose that needs to attract each other, and that's through the hydrogen bonding that they have with each other. So adding the water actually helps with that. And then after you do that, you dry it, you don't, and then you press it, and then the next slide, Dr. Phil.
Before we move on, and I think this is a good, well, let's just address Shelby's question here. He says, we are making a distinction. I'll change that to a question and say, are we making a distinction between leaf casting, which is applying pulp directly, versus infilling, which is couching and add a piece to infill with a...
Yes.
You're making a distinction in terms of the method, but both of these would be considered leaf casting. And in Keiko Key's paper, she discusses both of them as leaf casting. If done well, I do not think CGC could tell the difference.
CGC would say they were both leaf casting.
And Shelby's kind of figures that may be the case, right? So it's not that he didn't have an idea here, but he's asking for us to elaborate on it. I consider this to be leaf casting. What I would say is there's in situ leaf casting, and it has certain advantages. And this would be ex situ leaf casting, where you're making the cast and then laying it in place. Also has certain advantages and disadvantages. So we can talk about those as we go, but I will indeed give you the next slide, sir.
So here's how it looked like afterwards. You have the left spot there that you see is with starch, and it's just strong as heck. You couldn't pull it out at all. And the one in the middle with no starch, you couldn't pull it out either. And the one on the right-hand side, you couldn't pull it out either. So it worked really beautifully. If you hydrate the pulp after you place it, right?
Yeah.
If you don't do that, you're gonna have weak bonding between the couch pieces and the wrap,
Right.
and it'll lift. Ultimately, it'll fail, I think. So even after I aged it for a while, it's still holding, right? No issues.
The point here being that you were able to work through a couple of issues with your first attempt, and just by modifying slightly the way that you applied these cast sheets, infills, you were able to get bonding that would be, the envy of any leaf caster.
Yeah.
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
Just for the sake of what I saw before in the pictures, to clarify, you're not doing this on a suction table. This is all gravity.
No. Yeah, just no suction table at all.
The professor doesn't have a suction table.
I don't have
just
one.
gravity.
He's waiting for somebody to come up with a zero cost solution. There was the $100 solution from the lawyer, $150 from the pilot, but he's living on professor wages. So he's looking for a zero cost.
It's pretty sad, Dr. Paul, what I make. So I'm not gonna.
As the professor knows, I actually came up with a zero cost suction table.
I know,
and I'm going to be bringing it out soon. I shared it with him already. So
that's genius what you did there.
I think this is genius too, though, because you're showing here in the same way where Dr. Paul, you mentioned earlier, like as a scientific approach, you isolate the variables. So this is kind of unintentionally isolating a variable, and to say that the suction, while it may help for a stronger bond, clearly isn't completely necessary. And really, in terms of the hierarchy of what is most important, it probably helps, but clearly it's not as important as having the paper be really wet before you try to have the bonding happen. And,
exactly.
True.
Yeah. My concern was once I rolled it, the fibers are now together. It's not going to really adhere well. And that wasn't the case at all. Once you rehydrate the fibers, actually, it does work.
Right.
You have to be on it, right? You can't just leave it alone and step away, right? So you have to.
No,
So a couple other things worth saying there, Phil. Thinking about handmade paper, it's almost never done with a vacuum. It's just gravity formed, A.
Yep.
B, the big proponent of the vacuum tables are the conservators who are using a dilute pulp in solution over the page with a vacuum to create infill into specific cavities.
Yeah.
For larger pages with a bunch of holes. And when you use that method, you will want vacuum because you want to speed up the pulp. You don't want the pulp settling on your work anywhere except the voids.
Yeah.
One of the things, and obviously Kenny Sanderson is the one who's best known for submersion leaf casting of comic book pages. One of the things that Kenny comments almost every time he does one of these, is that he could not do the casting as quickly, as efficiently, and for the prices that he charges if he was spot casting.
Yep.
So to make the distinction between what we typically see on Jerry the Jitterbug's channel, that's spot casting. He's spot casting with vacuum. The professor here is spot casting without a vacuum. Either one's fine. If you're doing full submersion, which Jerry the Jitterbug did on a few early videos, but I do not believe he does anymore. I haven't seen in years him do it on his channel, but feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. And again, we can ask him directly when we have him on. You absolutely need a vacuum to do that method.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I remember when Jerry first started working, right, without the vacuum table, I think he was doing similar kind of work, right? And he was
he?
doing the paper towels underneath, and he was really
Yep.
perfect doing it, you know. So he does show both, right?
I know that he did that later. He showed how he would do it without a vacuum table. I didn't know that he started that way, but
he started that way. Yeah.
Absolutely, he's done it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kenny mentioned to me too, just on the note of wetting the paper. If you need to do a cast without washing the paper, the alternative is to heavily humidify it, and that's to stress the fact that that's what you're going to need for the bond. To think that you can just do it on dry paper is crazy. It doesn't make any sense. So
another thing that's very important here to talk about is that the way that the pulp is prepped is everything. If you have pulp that is going to shrink as it dries or as it bonds, then you're going to get cockling and differential shrinkage, which is a big problem. So pulp preparation, which the professor spent a lot of time working on, is critical here.
Yeah, and this is, by the way, this is abaca. Abaca does shrink at the end, but as long as you press it at the end, it goes back to its normal form. So there is no issue there. Next slide, please.
Yes, sir.
And this is the next thing I'm going to talk about is formation aid for infills, right? Formation aid is polyethylene oxide that has this very mucilage kind of consistency and enables you to add to difficult fibers that you work with and can separate the fibers from each other so you don't get the knots and when you pipette
lumps.
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at the image on the left, I have A without formation aid, B with formation aid, and there is no difference between the two when you look at them dry.
Wow.
Yeah, but once you put them on, a light box, now you see the difference. A has all these lumps,
huge difference,
and B is like almost clear.
Wow.
And for background, these were not cooched infills. These were both in situ leaf cast,
Yes.
spot cast, obviously, without a vacuum. The
Right.
exact same pulp.
Yeah, same exact pulp. I have a video on my
B
channel.
had the addition of a little bit of formation aid.
Exactly. So formation aid, if you go to the next slide, I'll show you what it is. It's polyethylene oxide. It creates this unionic mucilage in pulp that allows for better fiber distribution, right? So the fibers aren't now stuck together anymore. So if you look at the untreated on the picture on the top right, you can see the untreated pulp. If you go down to the bottom too, you can see me adding formation aid, which creates that mucilage in the middle. And then the bottom left picture there that you can see has in it like 20 minutes later after adding the formation aid. And what you end up with is a mucilage that is not lumpy. You end up with a solution that is not lumpy. So if you look at the spoon I'm holding here on the right-hand side, you can see how the fibers are separated from each other in that spoon. That's just a spoonful of that.
Yeah.
So what it does at the end gives you these nice, consistent, and even sheets, no lumps, very natural looking, very smooth to the touch, and the infills exhibit extreme high strength in bonding with the wraps.
Also,
very stable,
practically necessary to get the thinness of the paper we're after, right? We're talking about 1/10 of a millimeter essentially here with that lumpy pulp. So there's two images here. On the right, you can see the lumpiness of that pulp in the above image, and then how the disaggregation of all those fibers allows for this lighter pulp with the suspension of the fibers right below it. But the same thing can be seen if you look on the left in the beaker that says untreated. You see this kind of brownish water with white lumps in it.
Yeah.
And then when you look at the beaker below, you see a more uniform suspension, right?
Yeah.
We need this uniform suspension to have non-lumpy paper. We need non-lumpy paper to have strong paper that is thin so that we can match the thickness of a single wrap.
Yeah.
So these are technologies that need to be sorted out in order to achieve a best practice leaf casting. And again, these are, although the professor's a super smart guy, he didn't invent this, right? This goes back to Japanese paper making centuries and centuries. And it's something that's well understood by paper makers. And it's well documented in the peer-reviewed literature that he and I have been studying.
Absolutely. And, in the Japanese literature, of course, they use neri, which is tororo aoi, right? And
it's from a root.
That root of a plant, and you dip it into the water and gives you this nice mucilage. They take it and they add it to the vat of the pulp, and then they make their paper that way, right?
Yeah.
And you can there are videos on YouTube you can watch on how to make the mucilage from okra. You could do it. Guar gum, you could do it, right? So there's alternative to it, more natural alternative, which I haven't really tried, right? So I am.
Well, it's so easy to get the powder from a carriage house. And it really just takes a couple granules of the powder mixed into your pulp.
It's amazing
to give you this. There isn't really a better term than mucilage to give you this.
So the way I make it is you add the 0.15 grams to 100 mils of water in the blender and let it go for a while, and next thing you know, you have that mucilage, right?
Can I go back one slide? I just want to show something that I think is so again, if you look at the A and B, right, the B has the formation 8 in it and the A doesn't. And to me, it looks like that B, you're getting more of a feathered edge, for maybe a lack of a better word, to the fill, and that's so apparent looking there, and that's so apparent after showing the pictures after this slide that we were just looking at and showing the consistency, and like that is a direct result of that consistency. It's not all it's more natural and spread out.
More natural. It feathers the edges of the fibers. You get that nice attachment appearance. Is beautiful.
And that's more so uniform. You don't get like a stiff piece of paper you added in. It feels more like that is that's the difference.
It feels natural. It's bendable. It's no right. It's like you could bend it.
Yeah. Right? And funny enough, this formation aid. So you would think that because it creates this mucilage, that maybe if after it dried, it would dry sticky, or there would be some resin, something. Nothing. As a matter of fact, if you have this, so if you're just make a sheet of this paper and you take the water that passes through the mold and you just put leave some on your countertop, for example, it evaporates away and leaves nothing, literal nothing. It's such a tiny amount of chemical in the end. It's a tiny white powder that is less than dust. It doesn't end up sticky. It doesn't end up anything. So your book and your paper completely unaffected by this material.
Yeah, it's 1/10 of a gram for 100 mil. You're adding like 5 to 10 mils to your prep at the end, and you're filling a spot that is like 2 by 5.
It's less than dust.
With nothing. Yeah.
It is incredible how much of a difference just by looking at the untreated and the treated beaker there with the pulp in it. It's so obvious there that why wouldn't you use this? You would use this. Best practice.
Yeah. Best practice.
So this is what the professor and I are. This is how we're making paper.
And you can see the fibers of the abaca. That's why I love abaca. Look, it's difficult to work with, but with formation aids, it's not that difficult now. But you look at the bottom central picture, you can see the fibers on this. And these are beaten fibers.
Professor, can I ask you a question just for the viewers, really? So why, maybe the viewers are saying, hey, this is newsprint. Why isn't he sourcing a newsprint?
We're going to talk about that, actually. That's on another slide. We're going to cover it, right?
Yeah.
Do we want to move on? We can talk about it there?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, so this is a bit of math here involved, and I actually built an Excel sheet ultimately with all these numbers, and it's now much easier to calculate how much.
checking the number of live viewers right now. Go ahead. We're going to see how many we lose during this math equation.
I'm going to try to be not as much as detailed.
No.
I'll just explain
Well,
the
selfishly,
process.
this is
what
for us.
Yeah. So say you made pulp, right? And you don't know how much pulp you added to it. You have some water in there. You have pulp in there. And then you have a spot to fill. How much of that pulp do you need to add to that spot to make it equal to the width of your wrap? So that's the math here, right?
Right.
So the way to do it is to do an experimental, let's see. So I did this. Okay. So if you look on the right-hand side, you see the image there. So what I did is a patch here, just a test patch that is 2x7. Let it dry, and then you measure the thickness of that patch. So the thickness of that patch, in my case, was 0.07 millimeters when I measured it with a caliper. And this caliper, by the way, if you guys want to get it, it's a Vinca caliper from Amazon. It's like $10. Really heavy duty kind of thing, right? And it's like has batteries, works immediately. They can measure things.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So here's the I'll read the bold at least, and then I'll explain the rest without going into math too much. Okay, a 20 ml sample of a specific pulp recipe is used to create a random test rectangle. So I have it here, which is 2x7. After pressing it and drying it, the length of the width of that sample were measured to be 7 by 2 centimeters. So you have an area here of 14 centimeter squares. If you multiply 2 by 7, pretend this is a rectangle, that's what you have. And I measured the width of that sample, turned out to be 0.07 millimeters, right? So now a comic book wrap had an area of a loss that is measured to be 2 by 13, has an area of 26 centimeter squares. The question is, how much of your pulp do you need to add to that area, the 26 centimeter squares, to cover it so that the height of it is the same as the wrap and it's filled? So the amount of pulp you're adding here is at question. And the A, B, C, D that follow are all the math involved in calculating how much pulp to add.
So it's actually pretty simple. And in fact, there's some math involved, right? Which can intimidate people. We did lose 4 live viewers while you were talking just now. I'm not joking. That said, at the end of the day, all you're doing is saying, how thick was what was lost? How thick is my material that I'm replacing it with? And you do a little bit of math so that you know how much fluid, how much pulp to put in there to replace exactly what is missing. This is standard practice among paper conservationists in museums, in libraries. Nobody would even imagine leaf casting without doing this work. It just isn't done. This is considered best practice. This is how it's done. And as a matter of fact, so this method here, you adapted from a paper that you and I were both talking about, discussing.
But yes, I have the reference at the bottom.
Right. Magnolia paper. And I'm obviously a fan of Don Farnsworth, and he worked directly with Keiko Keys and co-authored paper with her back in the 70s. Really a pioneer in leaf casting for these and in sort of making a science out of leaf casting. He's got an app for your iPhone. I imagine it's on Android too, though I am not 100% sure about that. He and his colleagues over at Magnolia Paper, which you should definitely check out, have an app where you just measure a few things, plug it in, and he'll tell you exactly what volume of pulp you need to infill any void. And again, this is just how it's done in paper conservation. This is just best practice. So the professor and I, we're working through all of these tools, and we're doing these studies to build this toolkit of best practice, because there are a lot of people around the world practicing leaf casting, and there are not very many practicing leaf casting on comic books or newsprint in general.
Yeah.
So some of these have to be adapted, they have to be tested, they have to be worked through. in order to work on comic books, but we're here to do the work. This is what we enjoy. This is what science is about. And we're both scientists, and I love this. And this is, again, why this work, this series of videos is why I wanted to have you back on, Professor, because I think this work is so important. Again, it addresses the issues that other people that are some other people that are leaf casting have with the thickness of their infills and the strength of the infills and the non-homogeneous nature of the infills, etc. So
right, that all like sort of,
let's get away from this math so we can see if we can get our viewership back up.
And basically, you end up when you test it, right? So I did the videos on my channel. I didn't get too many people viewing them, and the short kind of math, of course, turns people off sometimes. But regardless, when you do the math and you calculate how much pulp you need to add to the left and the right-hand side, you put them in there, then you tease them into position, right? You use a spatula to separate the fibers and make it like more even in there. And then finally, you just basically cover it, dry it. You don't roll it, because once you roll it, everything's going to exit from the holes because it's kind of right. So you dry it first, and then you press it, and you get what you see there on the right-hand side. The top image is, and the bottom image is with the light box. The top image isn't with the light box.
Yeah,
you can see again you can see the consistency of the cast is very even.
And again, just to be clear, you weren't trying to match the paper color, the pulp color here. Right?
Yeah,
so. As a scientist, you need to separate, variables, right?
Right.
And so here we were just working on the thickness of the paper and the bond and the strength of the cast and the uniformity of it. And to me, it's incredible.
It's very
incredible.
Yeah, it looked thin to my eye after I saw it. I was like, that's not how I usually make my leaf casting, right? It's usually thicker than that. And actually, I ended up, after I got this caliper, I measured some other leaf casting I did. They're quite thick. So so when I measured these, they are the exact size as the wrap. When you use this, like
literally perfect.
Yeah, really perfect, like 0.12 average, right? You got that all throughout.
And you're saying that's after you did the calculations. and to say that while sometimes this is art, in this instance, the science really helped you out to make it so you didn't have to worry about it being a different thickness.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, to be fair, there's an empirical nature of it too, right? So it's not purely a calculated value because you made a test patch and then you calculated off your test patch.
Yeah.
So if you do it just off the theoretic value, you're going to introduce some error, right?
Yeah.
So that's why it's done the way that it's done. That's how it was done in that poster as well. But my hat's off to you, Professor, in this work and this series of videos. And again, why we wanted to call people's attention to it. Ben Stewart says, thank you all so much for doing this work and these tutorials. He loves math, by the way.
Thank you, Ben.
He's not intimidated.
No. And I'm not a mathematician. I'm a biologist, as you know, but we use math in biology,
Yeah, we have to use it.
I mean, I don't even really like math.
So we promised a conversation. We promised a conversation about the material used.
Yeah.
And we have some talking points here. So we're going to roll through some of these talking points and have some interaction on them. The bullets here are not meant for you necessarily to read. They're more for us to use as a guideline for a conversation. So why don't you take it away, Professor, and get us started, and then we'll kind of talk about each of these bullet points.
Sure. So there is a tradition in conservation that you replace like with like. So if you have wood pulp, you need wood pulp, right? But if you do use wood pulp, then supplement it with something that gives you better hydrogen bonding, like abaca or cotton linters, right? So there is no shame in trying different kind of papers and see what best, and mix them up and see what best matches with the wrap.
So I wanted to comment on this. So the tradition in paper conservation for libraries, for museums, in the literature generally is replace like with like, as the professor states here. And I think that would be a reasonable place to start for any paper. I'm gonna make the argument for deviating from that with comic books. Here's why. In museums, in libraries, what kinds of documents are they dealing with? Generally not newsprint. They are generally dealing with handmade, mostly cotton rag paper, mostly centuries old, extremely important documents like copies of the Declaration of Independence or the Magna Carta, extremely important pieces of art, drawings by Leonardo da Vinci, etc., or handmade books that are so rare the known copies number in the few dozen, right? And they were literally handmade paper, handwritten, all of the text, right, before the invention of the printing press. In those instances, and of course, by the way, they're also dealing with papers from all around the world. So they're not just dealing with paper made in a Western tradition. They're dealing with papers made in Japan and in the Far East, the Middle East, etc. There are different traditions in all of those places in terms of paper making. In those contexts, and especially because they're very concerned with the provenance of every one of those pieces of history, like replace like with like makes perfect sense. And I think it really is the correct thing to do. Here's why I think I'll make the argument that it is not what we should do for comic books. Comic books are made with newsprint. Newsprint is mostly ground up trees. Ground up trees contain a lot of lignin. Lignin destroys paper. So replacing ground up newsprint with more newsprint is just like saying, well, there was a landmine here and I diffused it and then I replaced it with a new landmine. You're welcome. It doesn't really make sense to me, especially because we can use like with like to be appearance only, or only the properties that matter to us. So for example, we can have the same opacity, the same thickness, the same strength, or even greater strength, the same color, the same tone, and we can use materials that have no lignin in them. And I don't know why we wouldn't do that, especially because we're not really trying to preserve the provenance. These are mass-produced items. Other than Harold Curtis's example, or a few others, for the most part, these were interchangeable off the newsstand. To me, I make the argument similar to if I'm going to restore a Corvette today. When it was originally painted, it was painted with lacquer paint. That lacquer paint takes a lot of energy to upkeep, and it's good for 5 or 10 years, and then it's going to be cracked, and I'm going to have to strip the whole car and repaint it again. Or I can paint it with modern paints that to the naked eye will not appear any different and will be good for analogy. 20 or 30 years with almost no maintenance whatsoever. Yeah. Why would I paint it with lacquer paint? Especially also, by the way, the lacquer paint has other problems like environmental and health issues, right? Not that we're dealing with that here. But that's my argument. So I don't know that I'm going to die on that hill, but I'm making that argument and I'm open to conversation around it. But that's where I'm at. And I'm working on best practices for matching color, opacity, thickness, strength, and being stable long-term instead of just another ticking time bomb.
Yes. And I think your point is well taken, and I agree. I think like with like sometimes you have inferior quality, right? You're adding to your long term, right?
Yeah, which again, I get the argument. And if somebody said, hey, this is my philosophy on it, I don't have any beef with it, right? It's just like there are guys that restore a Corvette and put and go back to the original lacquer paint, and they insist on it.
Yeah.
Okay, knock yourself out.
For the sake of this, so specifically, then what you're saying is that while the covers are, a cotton rag base, that's more acceptable. But for the interiors and newsprint, it doesn't make sense to be replacing missing parts with more newsprint.
I'm not going to, at the moment, make a distinction between the covers and the interior. And I don't have yet a recipe. I will say this from what so I'm making paper and I'm testing paper, as is the professor here, obviously. What I have learned from my study of the literature and the paper that I've made is that we don't want pure cotton rag. While that does make good paper, strong paper in and of itself, it doesn't actually bond well in the leaf casting, in situ leaf casting specifically. And that is because pure cotton rag paper has almost no hemicellulose, and the hemicellulose is very important for the bonding.
Yeah.
So the Abaca that the professor likes to use has really good strength qualities and has quite a bit of hemicellulose, as does several other materials. Hemp does, help me out, professor. The other one that's used, linen, flax is used extensively in paper making and has almost no lignin and has a good ratio of cellulose to hemicellulose and will give you a better bond with the existing paper. Any of those materials, so there's 4 I just called out, any of those materials can be mixed and matched. They're also all available in a variety of colors.
Yep,
so with just those few raw materials, we can do everything from a cover to an interior page with essentially any amount of tanning, aging, or patina that we want to recreate.
Yeah.
That's a good answer.
Very good answer. Excellent. And the other thing, any additions you want to add to your pulp formula, like sizing, natural dyes like tea, calcium hydroxide to bring up the pH to an alkaline level. Now, Abaca I'm using has an alkaline pH to it, so if you dye it, it goes to like pH 7 at the end that I measured. But calcium hydroxide is a good addition. You could add small amount of it. Methyl cellulose is optional, and retention agents if you are dyeing your pulp.
Mm-hmm.
So these are what they call in the industry functional aids, right? And you could add them because these are your own personal preferences.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't want to add them, it's not going to hurt my feelings, But so it's up to you guys. You could use
it's free country.
Free country, right? It's your book. You're working on it. You're the person working on that, right? And then formation
I will
aid
make. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, formation aid. Then you can add. It's in the paper industry, at least. It's known as the process aid, right? It helps you with these nice long sheets. And I think, to me, now that I have tried it with Abaca, most definitely I would use it again, right?
Yeah.
In the future.
I'll make an argument also. So you demonstrated that the formation aid is really critical to uniformity of the sheet, and that is critical to getting the sheet to be strong yet quite thin.
Yeah.
So I think it's almost necessary for a best practice in comic books, although again, free country, right?
Free country, you can use
the
it.
Other one, the other one that I'll make an argument.
You can just use, I think, your pulp recipe, just water and paper. That's perfectly okay. That's how I did it for years, right?
Yeah.
And it works. I mean, certainly it works. But these are additions because once you put your Abaca, at least, in the water overnight, you're going to lose the sizing. So if you don't add sizing to it, you're not. Yeah, you're not.
That's a good segue into what the point I wanted to make is I'll also make this argument about sizing. Sizing makes your paper essentially impervious to water. Of course, that's not absolute, right? Over time, it will still soak up water, sized paper. But if the difference between a piece of printer paper and a piece in a paper towel, for example, you get a drop of water on a piece of printer paper. If you wipe it real quick, it's gone essentially, and you wouldn't know it was there. You put a drop of water on the top of a comic book, you wipe it immediately, you wouldn't know it was there. You put a drop of water on a paper towel, there's nothing can be done about it. It's instantly absorbed, and it's in the paper towel now. It's distorted the shape of the towel.
Yeah.
And even if you just let the towel air dry, you will see the imprint of the drop there because it has changed now the shape of the paper, right? If you don't size your pulp when you leaf cast, you're putting essentially that paper towel kind of paper in place where the rest of the page is sized. So why does this matter? Well, maybe it doesn't. But if you have humidity changes that your comic book experiences, that section that's been leaf cast is readily absorbing humidity from the atmosphere, and the rest of the book isn't.
Yeah.
So you're getting an effect there which could cause a distortion, a wrinkle, cockling, any number of issues. This is where I say you replace like with like. The original paper is sized, and it serves a function, and it's not destroying the paper over time. As a matter of fact, it protects the paper from a number of things, not the least of which is water incursion. For me, best practice here is definitely using sizing when you leaf cast.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Paul. And then the way I make my pulp is I cut the abaca pieces, right? I weigh them, I cut them, I put them in water overnight, warm water initially, and then I stick them in the blender. And my blender, the one I use, I dulled the blades.
Yeah.
In here, yeah. I dulled the blades so you get a better prep at the end, almost equivalent to eating.
Yeah, Don Farnsworth published about that and did a test. Paper with normal blades in the blender, paper with the blades. Actually, what he did was instead of dull them, he flipped them. So it was the leading edge
smart.
was the blunt edge, and it's beating the pulp more than cutting it. And he demonstrated in a series of experiments in the determinate paper making that he made stronger paper with the blades flipped blunt edge forward than with the blades blunt edge trailing.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I blend it, and I then if you don't want to add formation aid, you could pick the big lumps with the tweezers. You know, some people filter their prep. I filtered my prep in the past, but it wasn't abaca. Abaca is difficult to filter through the spaghetti filters.
It's time consuming too.
Yeah.
It is. All this is, yeah.
So I add formation aid, and I add slowly, little at a time, and assess it. And if I need to add more, I add more. You don't want to add too much. If you add too much, it becomes very viscous and difficult to work with, right? So add it a little bit at a time, like 5 mils initially to 100 mils, and then I need to add another 5 mils, and add another 5 mils. And then I have that ready now to use almost immediately. Anything left over, you don't want to use. You want to discard, because so I make them in small batches typically, right?
Yeah.
And for pulp storage without any formation added to it, you could store it in the refrigerator for up to a week, I would say, sometimes longer, with good fibers. You know, they're more resistant to mold contamination, bacterial contamination. Cellulitic organisms take a while to grow on these pulps in the fridge. Right, so I'm saying a week, and I'm being very conservative. You could go up to 3 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks, no problem, right? And the only way to assess if they are there or not is to do a culture. I have a lab. I can do culture. I can do these kind of experiments. So don't use old pulp. Old pulp over a month in at room temperature is going to be a bad idea, in my opinion.
Right. Except you can your pulp, which is what I'm working on right now. So there was a paper put out by Patricia Ham a few decades ago in which she discussed this very problem, and the problem of, like, imagine you have 1,000-year-old book and the entire book is worm-eaten, and you need to cast every page of the whole book. You want your pulp to match, but that is a job that is going to take you months.
Yeah.
So how do you get the perfect pulp matched all the way through and preserve it for months? You can it. So I'm actually working on that at the moment as well. Canning the pulp allows you to preserve it at room temperature more or less indefinitely.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
there's a lot of ways to skin the cat. And also there's very few new ideas under the sun, right? That's why this is what I love about science. This is what I love about the way that we grow science is we document what we've done. Other people can find it. Other people can test it. They can repeat our results, or they can find out, they can debunk our results and say, this is not repeatable. That this isn't true.
Yeah.
Once we repeat it and we master repeating somebody else's work, we can build upon it, and then we can publish our results. And then the next person that comes along is just a little farther along than we were. And that's how we advance technology. That's how we advance science, how we advance our society.
What we're doing here is hypothesis testing, and there is a peer review process. So everybody's, we have these videos on YouTube. Anyone can watch them. Anyone can repeat them. If I am wrong, I'm wrong. I'm the first to admit it. That's one of the
I love being wrong.
Being a scientist is to be humble, right?
Yeah.
If you show me that I am wrong, I'd be applauding you. I'd be saying, thank you for letting me show me the way.
Yeah. I learned something today.
I learned something today. Yeah.
Vulu, you can freeze it. Yes. But freezing liquid pulp, obviously it expands upon freezing. So it's difficult to store frozen and takes up quite a bit of volume. You also can dehydrate it and then freeze it. That also works. But if you dehydrate it, you probably don't need freezing. So a couple of solutions there. Go back actually to the one before this, Ben Stewart's question. Yeah. Provide input about color matching. I do want to talk about this a little bit. So Professor has some great videos on dyeing with tea and how you can't just, well, you can, but how if you dye with tea, best practice is to use a retention aid, because you can leave tide marks if you're not careful after dyeing with tea in the rest of the paper. That said, I'm going to reference again Magnolia Paper. Their website is one everyone should check out. Don Farnsworth has an app also for color matching. Now, to use his app, you need some pretty expensive colorimetric equipment, which not everybody has access to. But if I remember correctly, he had about a dozen or 16 different pulp materials. And then he had an app where you could measure the color of any document, the tone and everything. And then it would spit out for you a recipe: 37% hemp,
I'm gonna get on this
46% linen, and 13% whatever. I didn't do the math, but it would add up to 100. And then you use that in combination with the paperweight app, and you can weigh out down to the milligram each of these pulps. You mix them up and you make your pulp sample, and the color is matched essentially perfectly. That said, as you've heard from Jerry, the Jitterbug, and others, comic books are not tanned uniformly, right? They're tanned more on the edges. And so if you match the edge color, you're not matching the color 1/4 inch in, and you're always making compromises with comic books. You've noticed some people will do double-sided cast because they have such a different color of tone, one side of a comic book wrap from another, that they'll actually cast one side in one color and the other side in another color so that neither one of them is jarring. Hats off to Larry's done that. I believe Jerry the Jitterbug has, but I know for sure that our man Kenny Sanderson has done that as well. So that's very sophisticated, but those are all things you can do to match the pulp. Now, does it affect grade? At the moment, CGC does not judge your leaf cast color or tone match with the existing paper. It does not affect grade whatsoever. Kenny Sanderson's actually saying it ought to. That ought to be considered. That may change at some point in the future. I would go so far, if you cast it with something really dark, like a brown paper bag, that might be enough to get them to notice the color. I don't know.
Very white.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody has. No, there's been examples submitted with with really ivory white paper.
Really?
And no commentation on it. As a matter of fact,
That's-
the book that put Jerry the Jitterbug on the map, for me at least, was that Hulk 181. I believe that was cast with some very white paper. I think it sort of jarringly stands out now. And that was one of his first efforts. I don't think I'm disparaging him to say that. And there was no notation, no change in no CGC does not make note of the color of the leaf casting, as Shelby points out.
Gotcha.
Yep.
And finally, there isn't one way. Every project is different. You got to assess every project separate and then go at it, right? And
yeah,
we're just giving you
absolutely.
some guidelines here that I hope people can read and understand that it's not, we're not dictators trying to tell you do this and do this and do that. We're telling you the best practice that is out there in conservation.
That we are aware of as of today, and that hopefully will change because hopefully we'll continue to learn, right? So it also means that what we tell you is best practice today. By implication, it means what we know of as best practice today. Our knowledge is not complete, A, and B, hopefully, again, our knowledge will grow. So not only is that not a contradiction, that's just the way science works.
Yes. And by the way, those dried up samples of pulp of unknown origin, I'm going to throw them out. I'm not going to use them because they're probably from last year or something. So they're probably filled with bacteria and fungi at this point.
Autoclave and
them,
can.
Yeah, I can autoclave them and can them. Yeah.
But maybe you don't want to put them in a comic though. Make some custom handmade paper. Sell it on, what is that? Where they sell the crafts? Etsy. There you go. Sell it on Etsy.
Yeah.
Bookmarks.
I have an account.
Bookmarks from Salem, Mass.
Yeah, I know, right?
Sign me up.
I know, right? Okay, the next slide, please.
Yes, sir.
This is the last slide. I'm going to show you a pulp recipe that you could use.
There we go.
So this is just a small amount of pulp. So it can do maybe a quarter of a page filled with pulp, right? So I should say quarter of a wrap, maybe you could do with it. 1 gram of paper, maybe less than that, but 1 gram of paper of your choice in warm water overnight. And you drain it the next day. You want to leave it there longer, you can leave it there longer. If it's a good abaca, usually 2 days. Then blend it in 50 mils of water for 2 minutes. And you do the intermittent blending, stop and scrape and reblend again. And then optional, you add the sizing, the dyes, the retention aid, and the formation aid towards the end. Formation aid should be the last thing you add. The last thing you add is formation aid. Once you add the formation aid, the pulp, you have to use it within an 8-hour period. After that, you have to throw it out. And then after I make it, you have now a volume there, say, of about 70 mils or so with the formation aid, and you bring the volume up to 100 mils with water. You do now a little sample area. You do a square, a circle, a rectangle, whatever you feel like doing. You measure it. You get the area for that and the thickness with the caliper. Then you apply the math that you went through, right? So if you build an Excel sheet, if you want that Excel sheet, let me know. I can send it to you. And then the amount of water in the pulp should not be changed after that. If you're going to use it the same day within the 8 hours on some other book, and you add water to it, the entire math is going to be altered. So you have to redo another patch and remeasure and go from there.
Yeah.
So, and if the same recipe is used repeatedly, then you can gauge in the future how much pulp to add in the future. You build an eye for things, right? It may not be 0.12, it may be 0.14, 0.15. That's, I think, acceptable within the range of mistakes, right? But I think if you try it initially and then add your, artistic feel to it and see if you need to add more to it or less to it, that's up to you at this point. Right? Leonardo da Vinci was an artist and he was also a scientist. He measured things and he drew things. And so he was both, right? And that's what conservation to me is. It's both.
Absolutely. What a great way to
Yeah.
wrap up this show too.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you again, Professor, for joining us. Thank you as always for joining us,
You're very welcome.
Phil.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks to all the viewers. I appreciate you sticking with us. Again, all the viewers, not only on this channel, but we're simulcast on Flying L Comics and in Experiments in Conservation, the Professor's channel. So viewers on those channels, welcome, welcome. Thank you all for a really interactive show, for great questions, and we appreciate everyone being here. I hope you have a wonderful week, and until next time, take care of one another. Bye, y'all.